Hello, everyone. So glad you came. It's wonderful to have you here. I noticed we have some questions, and I wanted to talk about fossilization as well. But I'm wondering if we should take a poll first. So I'm just curious about what you're thinking, and it'd be interesting while you're doing this poll to think about how your ideas about error correction have changed, how they're different from before you watched this webinar, and how they're different now. So anyway, I'm going to try to bring the poll up here for you. Hope you can all see that. And I'm going to go ahead and launch it actually now. There's 3 questions for you. And so I'd like you to answer those 3 questions if you could. Great. I'll just give you a few more seconds to finish. It's interesting to see that most people are not intimidated by error correction, which is good. 20% are, and maybe that comes from inexperience. I'm going to end the poll now, and I want to share the results with you. Yeah. I'm glad that most of you think that we should not be correcting all of the errors. Yeah. And in terms of accuracy, quite important. It is important, but keep in mind that for lower levels, we should not be so hard on them, because if we are hard on our lower levels, they might give up the idea of studying and learning English, right? So we want to really try to be easy on the lower levels. Remember, the higher levels are refining what they know, so accuracy is going to be much more important for them. Good. So I think that's all I want to say. 80% are not intimidated. Very good. I'm glad you're not going to correct everything. Good. And let them know. You can let them know beforehand. Sometimes you can focus on an activity and say, I'm giving you this writing activity. I'm just going to focus on fluency, your ability to get a message across. So you can let them know beforehand, and you can change it. This time I'm going to focus on your pronunciation. This time I'm going to focus on, if it's a speaking activity, this time I'm going to focus on your punctuation if it's a writing activity. So that's great. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. What I'm going to do is, I noticed that someone had a question about fossilization. And, fossilization is when we get to a certain point in language learning and we don't seem to be making any improvements. I often feel that way with my Italian, that I am at a level of, I can get my message across, I can convey meaning, I'm communicatively competent, but I'm having a very difficult time reaching those higher levels. So I think the thing is just keep encouraging your students, who become fossilized. And I think extensive reading is very important. So reading things that students are interested in, that they enjoy reading about, because reading is so important, even in our mother tongues, to increase our vocabulary and our ability to express ourselves. So keep encouraging your students, even if they become fossilized, where they don't seem like they're able to reach the next level. Keep encouraging them. Good. Good. Excellent. Well, communication is more important than accuracy. Yeah, it is. Definitely. Especially at lower levels, right? But the most important thing is being able to get a message across and convey meaning. We have several questions here. And if anybody actually wants to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I can actually have you, tell us your question. So that's the first one, tips to resolve fossilized mistakes. I think it again is just encouraging to continue and keep finding. And what you can maybe do is get them to do more things, read and listen to more things that interest them. Maybe things about their hobbies or, whatever gets them excited. That'll probably help.
You also mentioned, Sheila, sorry for coming in, noticing.
Yeah.
That you could put more emphasis on that as well during the lessons to make them notice.
Yeah.
As well. And whenever they make a mistake, just show them that the error occurred. And I have seen so many beautiful ideas regarding that. Actually, in the chat box, if you remember, I think it was from Roberta.
Yes.
Who had some ideas.
Absolutely. I wonder if Roberta could tell us even a little bit more about that. Roberta, could you tell us a little bit more about how you use colors and how you use your emoji with error correction?
Yes. So I think colors, actually, they are great because they are quite easy for students to memorize them. I am just very careful because sometimes we're so used to use like red color to correct mistakes, and they know that, so I avoid using red. So usually when I see something that's wrong, I just try to use yellow, because yellow reminds them the traffic light, so they pay more attention, And green, it's something that, yes, they did quite well. So I mean, this is something that I have personalized, but I think it's better for them to memorize. I think it's also important that, especially in writing, I try to write what it was good and what they have to improve. So I never write that was positive or that was negative. So I try to avoid these negative words. Mm-hmm. So to deal a little bit with their frustration, especially with adults. And yes, about the emoji idea, yes, I came up with this idea quite recently, maybe 2 months ago. And it worked pretty well with my teenagers. But I mean, it's not something that I show like happy face and it's okay, or if it's like a sad face, it's not okay. I try to say, okay, if it's a sad face, it's basically our pronunciation, because especially with Italian students, they have strong R's or strong L's, and it's very difficult. And it's not because they don't know the R or they don't know the L. Sometimes they are just lazy. Mm-hmm. So when I just show them the flashcard with the sad face, they know, oh my God, I think my R, I think that's my problem again. So they immediately correct themselves, Yeah. And it's fun. It's fun because they start laughing. So at the end, the error correction is not something painful. It's something fun,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Great ideas. I love those ideas. And I think the using the colors can help students remember, like if you use green for maybe, mistakes with verbs, for example, or you use pink for mistakes with nouns, or black for spelling, you can do it like that too, to create a code for your students.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you, Roberta. That was great. We have a question in the question and answer, and it says, new teachers are often lost when they correct during a fluency task. They often don't know what to correct. Are there any practical tips to guide those teachers? Yeah. I would just focus on what students should already know at that point, or what you've just gone over. So don't try to correct everything again. If it's a fluency task, just and you maybe let them know we're going to have a fluency task, but then it kind of turns into an accuracy task if you're focusing on something. But just choose one thing. Less is more. Less is more. You don't have to go overboard. And I know that's difficult for teachers, because they want to make sure their students, get all the information, but it took me a long time to realize that less is more. So
exactly. And I think another thing is that we do not want to interrupt our students while they are speaking to each other. Tasks. So one of the best ideas is possible to take notes. So monitor, be present, but just jot down what they do, what they say, including good examples of their use of language or errors as well. And these can be addressed at the end of the task or the activity, or at the end of the lesson, as you mentioned it during your presentation. So
exactly.
that's a way to.
I have a question for Sheila and Hedy, because it's to do with this fluency task, because obviously it's all easy when there is a clear target language. Like Sheila, you were saying, you know, accuracy, fluency. It's all fine when there is a clear target language, right? When we teach language. But what happens when you have a speaking activity in a skills lesson? There's no target language. And this is when many teachers are lost, because they simply don't know what to hold on to and what to correct, because if there's no target language, what do I correct in the speaking task?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you don't always need to correct things. Maybe you just need to focus on their ability to just have a conversation with somebody. So maybe sometimes you're not correcting anything.
Yeah, and then how do you respond? How do you reply to students who then say, oh, I haven't learned anything. My teacher didn't correct me once.
Uh-huh. Yeah, sometimes when you have young learners and parents will say that, you're not correcting everything in my child's papers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how many teachers feel, I think. So I wonder how you guys feel about it, and what would you say to teachers who simply don't know what errors to select for correction?
Okay, I think it's one of the most audible is, for instance, pronunciation. You know, chances are high that students will make errors or mistakes regarding their pronunciation. Also, I would focus on their use of language that we have already covered in class. So most probably know our students, and whatever we have covered regarding tenses, any target language.
It's what Sheila said. Yes,
exactly.
Thank you, Sheila.
Sure,
Thank you.
sure. I'm wondering.
I have one more question, Sheila.
Oh, sure, no problem. We can look at it now. I think maybe it's in terms of writing. Who does?
No, it's actually about that student who said to me specifically, it's a little anecdote, because it happened over 20 years ago when I started as a teacher. And I had this student who came up to me after a lesson, and she specifically asked me not to correct her, which was, you know, for a teacher who doesn't have a lot of experience, that was, you can imagine how I felt, in the sense that I just didn't know how to deal with this. So so my question is, because obviously as teachers, we have a correction policy. I mean, at least we should have one, right? So we correct during accuracy activities, we don't correct during fluency activities, we correct this, we don't correct this, we correct at this stage of the lesson, we don't correct when students are doing whatever they are doing, right? So we all have our own little roles, right? Now, I wonder if kind of letting students in on the roles that I have as my correction policy would actually help students understand the purpose of correction. You know, like if I say to my students that during accuracy activities, I only correct the target language because this is going to help them build confidence and use this target language in the fluency activity. Obviously, students will be kind of better prepared to be corrected. And see what I'm saying? Like, I wonder if this is also a way to go and a way to involve students in creating your correction policy. So it's not just coming from me as a teacher and only I understand what I'm doing, but it's also my students who understand why they are being corrected and what exactly I'm correcting. Because, you know, after 20 something years, when I go back to this, you know, case of the student who asked me not to correct her, I'm thinking, what if I had had a correction code at that point? Because obviously I didn't. I didn't know how to deal with correction. But what if I, you know, what if I had? Then would that student have approached me the way she approached me? Maybe not.
Yeah, I'm wondering why she said to you, don't correct my errors. Was her level fairly high? Was it a high level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was also, it was something about undermining her confidence. Perhaps it was me not doing it the right way. So I can't just say that it was the student who was at, you know, in the wrong, or it was simply a case of someone who just comes up to you and says, oh, Gabi, you know, if you don't correct me, please, I know I make mistakes, but I don't want to be corrected in class.
Yeah, you know, it would be interesting to keep a notebook of her errors, you know, like that you hear
Yeah.
and maybe at the end of class or during class, if you could just make a note of the errors that you hear, and then put all of those errors, those sentence errors that she's made on a handout. And then one day, the next time you see her for a lesson, if it's a one-on-one, for example, give her like 10 sentences of her errors and say, now I'm just going to use this as a warm-up activity, and I want you to see if you can correct these errors. And don't tell her they're her errors, just see if she can find them.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. You see, this is the problem when you are a new teacher. I mean, error correction is really, I mean, it's a difficult area. I can see Roberta is giving me this idea. Roberta, did you want to join this discussion? Do you want to say it to me?
Please
Yes.
join us, Roberta.
Yes. I just have 5 minutes, but I think it's important because you know, I had this problem sometimes with some students, but I think it's important to show them what are mistakes, especially pronunciation, because I work with Italian students, so it's very common pronunciation mistakes. So, for example, Gabi, one day I was having this class about R's, and then I displayed on the TV a movie scene from the Pink Panther. And we know that the protagonist is French, right? And there was a scene when the teacher was trying to make him speak hamburger. And Italians would say something like hamburger, you know? So in the scene was very fun because the teacher, she was trying to make him speak like hamburger. And obviously it was almost impossible. Then after 3 minutes, the students were laughing, and then they were like, wow, I don't want to say hamburger anymore. I want to say hamburger, you know?
Yeah, I know Roberta has to go. I had one more question for her, but I know she has to go. So maybe in the next webinar.
No, Gabi, I have 3 minutes, so no
Okay.
problem.
So, but you know, I have a question because you said like something about, okay, the mistakes that can impede or hamper understanding, right? So, but when you correct your students, do you actually grade errors in the sense, it may sound weird, but in the sense that you say to your students, okay, this error is really big. You just must remember not to ever say it again. This is a little error, but I'm going to just correct you. Is that something that you do as well? Like you grade errors, you mark them red, green, yellow, I mean.
Yeah, I think, well, honestly, not really. I just try to talk to them. It really depends on their, I mean, if you are dealing with children, I think it's important. Children, I say 10, 11, 12 years old. Then I think you have to say, wow, this is a big mistake. This is not a big mistake. Use like easy language. But with adults, I try to talk. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Roberta. Thanks for joining us. Do we have time for any final questions or comments, or anybody want to say anything about how they deal with error correction if they have some experience?
Yeah, thanks, Keila. Thank you,
Sure,
Hedy.
thank you. Anybody want to share anything or about their own experience with error correction? Okay, that's great. Question about peer and self-correction. That's right, because it doesn't have to always be the teacher that is correcting. We also need to have, peer correction and self-correction or self-assessment. What's your question, Gabby?
I mean, in terms of peer and self-correction, like how as a teacher, how can you elicit self-correction? Because the problem is that very often teachers again don't have the skills. So it's like, your immediate instinct is to just offer the correct answer, okay? Because it's not easy to elicit this self-correction. So I wonder if you may have some kind of practical ideas how to do that.
Yeah, I think that could come a lot with what we've discussed already in terms of listening to the errors that are heard and then presenting to the students in some way, whether they come from their papers or from their from written errors or spoken errors. I think that's really the best way, is try to take them from the students, use the students as a resource. It's going to be very difficult to do peer correction at lower levels. So don't expect that your lower levels are going to be able to correct their classmates' paper. It's because they just don't have enough experience with the language and their level's not high enough. So I think you can only really use peer correction for much higher levels.
Or just being very consistent is very important. So when it comes to lower level students, again, making them notice the errors. So just focusing, let's say, when we teach the present simple to them, and they, often miss the S after the third person singular.
Yeah.
And at the end of the verbs. So again, we can just come up with a kind of technique. Let's say I usually point to my ear, showing them that something is missing and what's wrong, so that they can correct themselves or help each other.
And that's great. You use that with the speaking activity, Hedy, when they're
Every
speaking?
single time, exactly.
Yeah, and that's another great idea, right? That's another idea that means that you don't have to open your mouth. You can just do it visually for your student.
Yeah, being consistent, using the same techniques or tools. It's like as we have in writing, we use the correction codes, for instance, in writing. So then when we can come up with our gestures, as you mentioned already, facial expressions to help our students correct their own speaking or errors in speaking as well.
Yes. And I like Bartolo said something in the chat. He said, I usually take a psychologist approach. I openly take notes while they walk. Then when we finish, we discuss specific parts of our conversation, not just mistakes, also compliments, so they don't feel intimidated by me writing. They usually self-correct themselves. It's a good way for them to focus on their speaking, very relaxed. Yeah, that's great. Do you want to say anything about that, Bartolo? Anything else about that? That's okay if you don't. Oh, go. I see you've unmuted yourself. Yeah, go ahead, Bartolo.
Yes. Hello. I didn't expect that. So
sorry. Do you want to say anything about?
So I like to joke with my students. So we have a very relaxed approach and not judgmental. And something that I want to express is that in my first class, I openly say that my English is not perfect, because I think especially adults have the idea that we have to reach a level where before we don't speak English, and before a line we don't speak English, and after that line we speak English. And this is not true. So it's a work in progress that continues always. And I think it's very important to openly discuss about our weaknesses. So I start from the first class to say that I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, and actually I openly discuss my mistakes, and this way they are more relaxed and talk to me.
I think that's great, Bartolo. It is very important that we create a classroom environment where our students are relaxed, because then they can make errors and not feel terrible about them. They need to be able to take risk And part of that is making errors. So it is very important. And keep letting them know it's very important to be communicatively competent. That's enough, you know, to be fluent. To learn a foreign language, a second language, is not an easy task. I mean, I have been living in Italy. I live in Italy. I'm married to an Italian. I've been here for years, and I still make a ton of errors. I'm still going to do that. But the thing is, at my level, which is probably, you know, B2, sometimes C1, depending on the day, I can get my message across. I can get meaning across. So really, really, I think that's important to focus on with your students. You know, it's great to be accurate and speak exactly like a native speaker or have 100% grammar accuracy, but there's a lot to be said for being able to get a message across, and encourage them. Encourage the fluency, because it's very difficult for most people to reach a native-like speaker level. It's very, very difficult. Yeah, so anyway, I'm glad you do that. And again, all of you, please remember to keep your students as relaxed as possible and let them know it's okay to make mistakes and that you make mistakes too. Yeah.
Sheila,
Mm-hmm.
Sheila.
Yeah.
How do you, because this just came to my mind, what do you do with students, because surely you must have had students like that, what do you do with students who are very fluent, but they are so horribly inaccurate that they can't, you know, like they can't even notice, they can't hear their own mistakes? So how can you help students like that?
Well, it sounds like they've become fossilized, right? They've gotten to a certain level.
Yeah, it's more than fossilized, because it's also it's the confidence of being accurate, which is obviously the wrong kind of confidence, because I mean, I've had students who are very confident speakers, extremely confident speakers, and it was very difficult for me to help them, because they simply didn't hear any correction. They didn't pay heed to any corrections, because they thought in their eyes everything was correct.
That's right.
So
I know.
so how can you help students?
I think you have to get them to notice as much as possible, but then otherwise you have to let it go, because sometimes there's just not going to be any hope to go beyond that fossilization. You do what you can, but I've had students like that too, and you just let it go and let them speak, and you know, and try to mention their errors and get them to notice. But I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I find it very hard to give up on students, so I kind of keep pushing and pushing and pushing, which obviously is very frustrating for the teacher, because as teachers, we tend to blame ourselves. I mean, at least I do. You know, I always say that it's not the student, it's the teacher's fault when a student cannot make any progress. So this is my approach.
Yeah.
So and Michael has something to say.
That's right.
Can he join?
Yeah, Michael's talked about fluency.
I wonder, you know, can one really call it fluency if it's completely riddled with error? I mean, if there's a difficulty, an obstacle to understanding, an obstacle to communication, so surely one has to interrupt at a certain point.
Yeah,
possibly
but,
with a
Michael,
recast.
but then
and a
what do you
recast
do?
can be constructive. Well, if they're not getting any feedback, then, I mean, surely the main point of error correction is as a form of feedback, and occasionally that needs to be explicit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But even if you, I'm sorry, I'm really persistent here. Sorry, Michael. Sorry, Sheila.
That's
but
okay.
If you, because I'm sure you had students like that, okay? It doesn't matter how many times you give them feedback. It doesn't matter how many times you get them to notice mistakes they make. They just go back to the same errors, making the same errors in 10 minutes. So
yes, well, I mean, that's obviously true of any form of explicit input, but
yes.
I think it's because these people have become very comfortable with what they can do.
This is what I meant when I said confidence. So, but comfortable because they are so unaware of their mistakes, or comfortable because they are happy with the level of English they have.
Right. And sometimes it's very hard to get them to push beyond that point.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to add on to that. I mean, as a non-native speaker, I do remember when I was in boarding school, which is quite a long time ago, my teacher actually said to me that I have this fossil English, that the error that I make and I don't realize it. And she told me, these are your error, but you're not going to change, because these, like you guys said, these are the fossil error that I make, but I would never change.
But
It
is that
was,
what the
you
teacher
know,
said, Janice? Is that what the teacher actually said, that these are your errors, but you are not going to change?
yeah, I'm afraid that was, no, she told me for 7 years, and that's what she said to me at my last, pretty much last month in the boarding school before I left. And I believe, I think I'm still making those error, which I probably didn't change. That's one thing that I remember quite clearly when I saw that question from I think from Roberta.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting
So,
too, because you made me think of pronunciation, Janice. And they say that people who start learning a language after the age of 12, it's very difficult for them to have native-like speaker pronunciation.
Oh, definitely, yes. Basically, a lot of my friends they came to England to study from, let's say, year 10, year 10, around 13, 14 years old, and the accent that they get is obviously, unless you basically talk to not a native speaker every day constantly, that's how you can catch the accent. But for a lot of them, in particular Asian students, it's very, very difficult to develop the native speaker accent.
Yeah.
I mean, I have 3 sisters, 2 of them they just can't develop the accent, whereas one of them, because they're good at learning the language, so it was okay for her to develop that accent, even though that she might have came at the age of 14. This is just from because I come from as a English learner as a student, so that's just my thought about the student error.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can't expect all of our language learners to have perfect native-like speaking pronunciation or grammar. We just, you got to give our students a break too, right? We got to think about ourselves too, learning a second language. We also have to think about our students' first languages. If our students are an Arabic speaker or a Chinese speaker, there's nothing in common with English, really. I mean, just even look at the characters. So that that's part of it too. How different is the mother tongue from the second language, from English?
And also the education system is very, very different. The way we learn, the way we are taught, the way we think, our logic is very different.
Exactly.
So that's also all part of the package, I can guess. So
excellent point.
Rewiring the brain through repetition. So even sometimes my students become so impatient that I still do not speak properly, and how long it will take me. But if we take a baby as an example, babies who are exposed to their first language, their mother tongue, 24/7, hopefully, it takes them ages, years to become really good and fluent, in that one language as well. So, and we adults may not be exposed to 24/7.
Exactly. And I'm going to say this, we all have preset parameters from our mother tongue, and those are very hard to break out of. Our mother tongue influences us in many ways. So, that's going to influence our learning of a second language as well. Those preset parameters, it's hard to break out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.